I just wanted to give you the heads up before we started recording. Thanks for starting that, Brooke. I'm assuming it's you. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Wilson. I serve as the director of the Student Success Center here at the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. Our work in the Student Success Center largely um, surrounds um, supporting colleges with guided pathways implementation. Um, I'm joined by my colleague, Holly from JFF. Holly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Holly Sino. I'm a senior manager at Jobs for the Future, a national nonprofit that works in the workforce and education spaces, and enjoying you all today to share a little bit about the work we've done with Monica over the past year or so, and excited to share more. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of notes before we jump in. I'm going to share my screen. We have slides. And um, Also, I've been sick, so thank you for your flexibility. And I know that this was scheduled for last week, but that means that I have a little bit of brain fog, so please bear with me. Also, I've lost electricity a couple times today. My computer's acting weird, so if I disappear, it's not because I don't want to be here. It's just because that's that kind of day. So, I'll be back if I disappear. Be patient, and I'm sure someone else will grab the rings. That was a gentle invitation for you, Holly. So. Um, I'm going to begin sharing my screen and we will go ahead and get started. Okay, let's see here. All right, so in getting started, so our purpose today is to help colleges and teams across our community and technical college system prepare to develop and implement their upcoming guided pathways plans. There's been a lot of work put into this process to simplify the planning process and put more emphasis into reporting in a way that is meaningful and data focused and creates opportunities for enhanced sharing and learning across colleges between 26 and 28. So what we'll do today is share an updated guided pathways reporting timeline for 26, 28, and also explore the updated guided pathways planning guide and planning tool. Now, if you were able to attend the guided pathways planning summit back in October, which feels like about 3 years ago, but really it was less than a month, a lot of this may not feel, but will be familiar to you. So um, this is an opportunity to ask questions, dig in more deeply, and then we will, like I said, we'll record this, we'll get this online so you can refer back to it. We're also going to have, or I'll be leading a couple more sessions as well. So I'm going to start by reminding us of our Guided Pathways vision and mission, and these were developed by our Guided Pathways Advisory Council, which is made up of liaisons from all of the commissions across the state. Um, and it's a call to action for us to continue to put equity at the center of our guided pathways work as we are required to do by the legislature. I know that that is, I'll say, a tricky undertaking, perhaps, in 2025 in our educational and political climate where equity can sometimes feel like a dirty word. But we are standing strong in our affirmation that all students from all backgrounds should be set up for success. So, our vision is a system that advances racial, social, and economic justice by achieving equitable student aspiration, access, economic progress, and educational and career attainment. I often think about this in terms of, what does it mean for a student to have equitable student aspiration, that all students get to dream big, whether they're coming through the doors thinking about a transfer opportunity, or whether they're coming through the doors to think about completing their high school diploma through a high school plus program. We want all students to be able to dream big and then to reach those dreams, both in terms of educational and career attainment. Our mission is to create an equitable system that prepares all learners to engage in a diverse society and workforce, achieve economic mobility through educational attainment, and contribute to a socially just society. We know that a majority of our students are coming through these doors because they want more and better for their lives. They want good jobs. They want family sustaining jobs. They want great careers, right? And there are, of course, some students that may be undecided or that may be here for personal enrichment, but the absolute majority of our students are here in pursuit of a better life. Our guided pathways guiding principle first is transformation, that in order that guided pathways requires equity-minded transformative organizational change. It's the changing our whole approach to student success by really putting students and their goals at the center. Um, that we believe in racial and social equity, that guided pathways requires culturally responsive commitment to racial and social equity by dismantling systemic policies and practices that perpetuate inequities, and that we are gauging student progress based off of common goals, that we are looking to understand how students in various groups are reaching those goals, and taking targeted approaches to make sure that they get there. We have to make sure that we are prioritizing community and recognizing that the voices of students, faculty, staff, and community members are essential to fully engage in adaptive problem-focused inquiry processes leading to meaningful action and sustained systemic change, which is a really long way of saying we have to care about what our community cares about, and we have to put that at the center. We have to acknowledge the problems that we're trying to solve through guided pathways. It requires collaboration, intentional collaborative learning through partnerships, professional and resource development. No one person can do guided pathways alone. And truly to transform our institutions to be fully student-centered, with advancing their end goals, that takes everyone, both within a campus community and outside of the campus in the community. And alignment. We have to focus on learning and outcomes that are aligned with community values and industry needs. Again, we have to be collaborating to understand what community needs truly are, and we also need to know what industry needs are. And I think it's always important to notice that those needs may not always be fully aligned, and that it's part of our work to make sure that students are coming out of our programs and into the jobs that aren't chewing them up and spitting them out. Industry needs don't always align with community values, and that is part of our work. Um, so in grounding us there, I want to just briefly speak to what our planning and reporting timeline is at this point, and then I'm going to hand it over to Holly, and she's going to talk more about the actual resources that have been released. So, as I mentioned, in October 25, the Guided Pathways Planning Summit occurred, and that is when the planning guide and planning tool were released. Those are available on our website. As soon as I stop talking, I'll put a link in the chat for that. I believe it was also attached to the invitation. Um, and we are asking for your work plan to be due in March 20th, 2026. So that gives several months for you to use this tool for self-reflection and to identify the places that you're going to focus for the next 2 years in your guided pathways work. I've actually shifted the scale of adoption. I'm going to have that due a little bit later as part of as part of your report for 24 and 26. So that said, the work that you're doing in preparing for your plan that's due in the 30th, in March, will inform your report that will be due in June. Um, we will provide feedback to colleges by June on your work plan. And then in the summer or fall, we're in the process of planning a retreat. and more opportunities for college staff at various levels to come together to continue to embed guided pathways and student success efforts into work plans when it comes to commissions and councils, to provide professional development, cross-commission conversations, data review, action planning, but also to be able to explore problems of practice, get feedback, and support from peer colleges. So we're working on exact dates for those things, and they will be available soon. Calendaring big events is surprisingly one of the hardest parts of my job. So I apologize to not have that all ready now, but there's a lot that we're contending with. Um, and then moving forward after next fall, continuing to have annual progress reporting with data reflection labs and cross-institutional support for problems of practice, as I already mentioned. And so there's that will be more fleshed out. But ultimately, what I want you to come away with is an understanding that I'm not going to be asking for big reports that you all have to do a lot of work on and may not find to be super useful, and that we may not get the most use out of turning what we're learning from you into action. What we want to do is build a reporting structure that is action oriented and useful for you all in continuing to explore what's working, what's not, how is equity embedded, how is it not, and what are the outcomes that you are seeing and seeking. So those are that is the kind of general overview of the reporting timeline. I think that, again, the most important takeaway from this slide is that your guided pathways work plan for 26-28 will be due March 20th of 2026. Holly, before I hand it over to you, I'm going to pause and just ask if there are any questions before we move forward. And folks are welcome to either unmute or type it into the chat.
Monica, quick question about, so what's due on March 20th is the Guided Pathways Action Plan
Yes.
and also a scale of adoption. I'm not as,
So the scale of adoption is was the foundation of the last work plan, and it looked at a number of practices and asked colleges to say, have you scaled this? Have you done? And when we talk about scaling it, it's like, is this practice reaching between 0 and 50% of all students, between 50 and 80% of all students, or 80% or more? And so we have some good data from your colleges around the scale of adoption for the last couple of years, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But instead of having it included in the plan that I have you submit in March, we're going to have that be a part of your reporting process for the last 2 years. In 24, colleges said these are our 3 focus areas that we're going to work on for the next 2 years. And so I'm going to be asking you as colleges, okay, so what progress did you make on those, and where have you been in scaling these processes? What's different now 2 years later? So my apologies for not updating that slide.
I guess I was just wondering about, so I understand that we're going to be updating our last submitted scale of adoption.
Mhm.
And then what would be the timeline for, would that also be March 20th or would that
That
be?
will be June.
Okay,
That will be June.
thank you.
I'll update these slides and send them out so that that's clear.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So the scale of adoption will be due in June with a 24 to 26 report. We're just building off of the 2024 report that was submitted, or is there a new format for that we should be on the lookout for?
I will be sending that out in the next week or 2.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, more to come on the 24-26 report. The idea, again, is that I want it to be simple for you all. So as a sneak peek, that will look like a updated scale of adoption, and a sort of legislative highlight. What would you, if you're sitting down with a legislator, what do you want them to know about your college's progress in guided pathways? And then there will also be how have you spent your guided pathways funding? So we want it to be really, really simple. We want it to be useful for you, and useful for us as well in terms of how we continue to tell the story across the state around guided pathways for each of the colleges. Any other questions? Okay, great. I'm going to move forward and Holly, you are welcome to take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Monica. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, before I get into the content, just very briefly, I wanted to give you kind of a sense of who we are. So Jobs for the Future partnered with SBCTC just to provide capacity, support, and additional kind of building into these products that came out. And so Jobs for the Future is a national nonprofit. And as you can see, our North Star is to support Americans facing barriers to economic advancement towards having quality jobs. And so all the work that we do kind of goes towards that goal in both the workforce and education systems. And the work we've done in the Washington Community College system is very directly aligned. So coming to you kind of with that lens as we worked for the past kind of length of time on this project, supporting Monica and her team and working with their expertise to develop what we have for you today. So if we go to the next slide, so as we've alluded to, there's two key planning resources that are now available online for your use. The first is an interactive planning guide, and the second is an actual action plan itself. This interactive planning guide gives you kind of a background and a sense of like where we envision guided pathways to be and what we call its ideal state, and then walks you through a series of steps that are meant to be scaffolding towards your planning process. It has, if you use the document in its online form, it has fillable kind of like PDF spots so that you can actually work within the document. It's meant to be a guide to have discussions with your planning team and utilize kind of these steps. The second piece of it is the action plan, which is what you'll actually take and submit to SBCTC. And so the interactive guide is meant to be used however makes the most sense for you, but it takes you through steps that will scaffold you towards being ready to submit this action plan once you've completed all the steps within the guide. And we've designed this so it's interactive and really kind of engaging for you and your teams to work towards an action plan that'll really be useful. So if we go to the next slide, to dig a little bit more into the design, as I mentioned, a couple things already, but here's some kind of key design principles that we went off of as we were planning this guide. We started with kind of in-depth research on what the system had done in the past, how heard from stakeholders across, including students, as well as different stakeholder groups in the system, and really relied on that collaboration to develop this key content for the guide and the structure for the action plan. We wanted the guide to be prescriptive enough in the sense that it had recommendations that are meant to be additive, but allow flexibility within a set of guidance. And so, we have a set of guidance that's used, but it's really meant to kind of build off things you're doing and not be seen as this whole new separate process, right? And so if you need to pull from equity plans or different things to put together your guided pathways plan for this kind of next planning period, we encourage all of that, to encourage those considerations and using this guidebook as your guidance in the discussions and the planning processes that'll get you towards that ultimate goal. We structured the steps in the planning process with sort of a continuous improvement approach. And so it acknowledges the effort in the past amount of time that's been put into guided pathways and looking at how each institution moves forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about the framework we used for that, but kind of thinking about what you want to stop doing, what you want to lean into and embrace more, and what you might want to change or embrace as new steps for the future. And finally here, the guide is really customizable. And so you can kind of use parts and pieces of it as it makes most sense. You can go through the whole entire thing if it makes sense to you, and really lean into what is the most important for your implementation efforts at, the stage and all the different factors that your campus has currently going into this planning cycle. In the future. So this is kind of the basis of how we develop these documents. And again, really relied on that stakeholder collaboration piece to ensure it would resonate, connect to previous work that was done, and bring the system into the future with an inclusive set of voices. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So this is the overview of the planning process. And this, as I said in the planning guide, takes you through a series of steps. And so these are the steps that are in the guide, and they kind of mirror what you would do in the action plan as well. So again, getting you prepped to have that action plan conversation. So the first is you'll go through and you complete a self-assessment. And that kind of takes you through different key areas of guided pathways planning, asks you to evaluate on a scale that we developed, and ensures that you kind of have a baseline of like where your college is going into your planning process. And we'll show more in just a moment. The second step is to reflect and prioritize for action. So you can kind of see the through line. You'll do some initial reflection, reflect and prioritize. You'll look at setting data-informed goals and evidence-based structures. And this section has a lot of really great information that we surface from across the field, across the system, looking at different best practices from the guided pathways plans previously, highlighting some specific practices so that you can dive deeper into different things folks are doing, and talked a little bit about different student stories and quotes from the focus group we did, just for your consideration. Step 4 would get you into that planning for action and really utilizing the guide. And then step 5 has you thinking about that continuous improvement approach. And so how you're going to look into the future to continue to plan for progress and impact and evaluate that progress as well. So we go to the next slide. These next couple of slides get us a little bit into the specifics of each of these steps. And so I mentioned step 1 is the institutional self-assessment. This, as you can see, is an example of one piece of the self-assessment. There's multiple different charts like this within the guide. You can see the top is the scale that we've developed. And so you can rank yourself from emerging, accelerating, sustaining, or leading. Emerging being this area of work is newer to you. You may have some work being done, and these are all defined within the guide. Accelerating is you're really picking up the pace, and this might be something you want to lean into in your next guided pathways planning cycle. Sustaining is something that's going really well and you want to keep doing, and it's kind of core to your work. And then leading might be that this is the place where you excel. Perhaps you're talking to other colleges about your work, things like that. So you'll see it has the core component, leading large scale change, the side component, that scale, has some guiding questions for you to reflect on. So again, this might be within a meeting with your college team. And then the farthest right column is evidence and reflections. And this piece, again, if you're using in the online version, is fillable if you want to use it that way. So as you're going through, you can kind of mark things off. We'll go to the next step. So this is the reflect and prioritize for action. This section kind of has more reflection questions that build on each other and ask you to, now that you've done the planning tool, the assessment tool, kind of think about what your strengths are, where you've had challenges, what might be your current needs, and how you want to move forward. And so asking you to really think about the scale that we use, how it relates to specific practices, and kind of continuing to build. And there's multiple points of reflection throughout this step in the guide. The next slide is the data-informed and evidence-based practices. So there's a couple of components to this section. One is we talk about indicators that you might consider as data points. And so there's specific indicators, leading and lagging indicators that have been reported on and will continue to be the focus of this work. The other component of this is we considered some additional indicators for success that were developed with the Guided Pathways Advisory Committee, and things that you may want to consider in terms of tracking your work, your data, even how you want to focus the steps going forward. So you'll see a couple of categories here. Some of these were in the areas of student services and equity, but there's a whole long list. And so that gives you kind of some framing of how to think about your work, how to talk about the work, and what data components you might need to be able to effectively track your work into the future. The second component of this section is the evidence-based practices. And so again, that's where you get into things that are being done throughout the system, core strategies, organized by key components of guided pathways planning, and areas you might want to consider. We can go to the next slide. Step 4 is getting into the planning for action. And so this is where you start to think about your college's implementation plan. It takes you through some goal setting using the SMARTY framework. And if you're not familiar, it's the SMART framework with inclusive and equitable tacked on to the end, as that's the core component of any of the work we're doing. And so kind of preps you to think about, you've started with your assessment. You've thought about what the ideal state of guided pathways is. You've done some reflection. You've looked at data and evidence-based practices that you could kind of make connections to your work and where you're at. And now how do we transition that into goals and getting into the action planning? And then that final piece is looking at how you track progress. And so again, there's some interactive and engaging pieces in the guide where you can actually get in there and say, okay, we have this goal. Here's where we would collect data from to track it. We want to look at this data every quarter, whatever it ends up being that makes the most sense, so that you have all of these pieces laid out, and they will easily transition into the actual action plan that you'll be submitting to SBCTC. And then you would go into drafting your action plan. And so again, just noting one last time, these are 2 separate documents, but you'll have that action plan to kind of transition your work into. After you to go through, there's a bunch of charts. It's interactive and editable, and should really be building on the work you're already doing, but just asking you to look ahead and outline those goals and the data pieces for the future. And I think that's some personal reflection. These are some of the activities I just included that we did in the in-person convening. And so as a starting point, it might kind of help to think about where your planning team is at, what support you might need as you get into this guide, and think about how you want to kind of kick things off, look at the materials, and really set forth the process that'll get you to where you want to be.
Thank you, Holly. We'll pause here again. Any questions so far about the actual guide or plan? And there are a couple of links to them in the chat.
I have a question. So thanks for going over this again. I was at the planning summit, but this was a good refresher. Just to be clear, that the 7-page action plan is what's due on March 20th. Okay. I'm
Yes.
seeing head nods. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Comments, reflections? Okay. So as a reminder, and this is again embedded throughout the work and thinking about leading and lagging indicators, or the guided pathways metrics. This is specifically what the legislature is looking at. So the first is student retention and persistence, and that is both on a quarter-to-quarter retention and annual retention and persistence. So wanting to, see where those changes are happening and changes across time. I'll also note that the legislature is looking at all of this in a disaggregated fashion. So they are slicing and dicing the data in different ways, or the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, who will be doing the final report in 2028, will be looking at different categories. And so that includes race, it includes socioeconomic status, first gen. So there are different ways that they'll be looking across all of these metrics. Another key area that they will look at is the attainment of college level math and English within the first year. And it's also really important to note that what that looks like varies by program, right? And so making sure coding on your courses is very important to make sure that we are picking that up. Sometimes there may be a course that satisfies a quantitative requirement for a technical degree that may not have the correct zip coding on it, and then you may not be getting credit for the good work that you're doing and getting students into and through their required math and English in their first year. So this is also a plug for, if you have questions, let me know. We want to make sure that everything is right on all sides of this work for you, so that you're also really able to track your progress and celebrate your success. Of course, they're looking at graduation and transfer rates, right? So, students completing certificates, apprenticeships, degrees, and then transferring on, which is also the piece around completion. And time to completion and transfer, right? Guided pathways really emerged as an opportunity to accelerate students into completion, based off of national data that was showing that students weren't completing in a reasonable amount of time. Students come to us because they think that, because the language around community colleges has been that we're 2-year programs. And we know that the data shows that we often are not 2-year programs, but what should that time to completion look like, particularly for students who are on a timeline, right? And then also looking at those post-completion outcomes. Are students getting jobs? Are they getting good jobs? What are those earnings and employment rates and types of employment? 2 years out, 3 years out, 6 years out. So these are all things that are a part of the legislative metrics. And because this is part of the legislative metrics, all of these, I don't think the time to completion, but all of the other ones, all of these other metrics are data is available in the first time enrolled in college dashboard that's available on the SBCTC website, so that you can explore by college. You can also explore by our system to sort of get a sense and understanding of where we are, how we're doing, and how your institution compares both across the state. And you can also put together comparison groups to sort of play around with. But these are some of the metrics that we encourage you to keep in mind as you are figuring out as you're developing your plan. Where do you really want to see? Where's your work? Where's your work? And Holly mentioned this in terms of indicators, and there's sort of a nice deep dive in the guide. And then again, as Holly mentioned, part of this planning process is really thinking about what do you need and want to start? What have you not gotten to yet? New actions, new interventions that are, suggested by what your data is telling you, and that provides you an opportunity to really turn that data into actionable insights. And what should you stop doing? Are there interventions that aren't working? Are there things that you've tried that are not producing the outcomes that were intended? How long do you continue to put effort into something that isn't showing the promise that effort could be put into another area? So that's something that we ask you to really think about and be real about. That may not be the typical state board approach of like maybe stop doing something. I know that we often are sort of like do more, but we want you to do what works. And if there's not data showing that something has worked, what can you learn from that? And how do you use that learning to advance something else, perhaps something that is emerging that you want to lean into? So, those actions, those initiatives that are already showing progress that could be further scaled. So these are some of the things that we ask you to think about in the planning guide as part of your reflection process. And I know that Holly already mentioned this was just another sort of doubling down on that. And we have a community of practice with Guided Pathways leads that met this morning, and we talked a lot about this. And some of the thinking and the appreciation for this new guide is that it's asking colleges to really go deep with their work. And I think that we've been in a place where we've been trying to be very broad for a long time. And that's not to say that there isn't value in the recognizing that there's a lot of work to do when we're talking about whole college transformation, right? But where are we going to where are students going to experience a transformation to their experience day to day, and their success, and wanting to make sure that we're going really, really deep in those places. And that may mean starting new things, stopping some things, and then also accelerating some other things. So before we wrap up, we're coming to a close. I want to make sure that there's space for other questions, comments, reflections. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Monica. Just going back to comments you made toward the beginning of the webinar, I'm wondering where there might be space to talk about how to balance the goals of Guided Pathways, particularly around equity and the larger environment.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So one of the things that we've been exploring and learning more about as a state is a framework called targeted universalism. And this is a framework that has been adopted by the Washington Office of Equity. And that may not be their official title, but I believe it's a cabinet level agency that reports to the governor. I think we're one of the few states that has an office like this. And they have been working really closely with the Attorney General's office to ensure that our equity work as a state is legal, right? And when I say legal, I mean, one, both by Washington standards of non-discrimination, but also federal standards. Federal legal standards, not dear colleague letters, not, interpretations of case law that aren't really standing up in court, right? But really like what is legal and illegal. And the truth is that we cannot discriminate on the basis of race, sex, veteran status, etc. And that's always been true. And so what it means is, when we're looking at a targeted universalist approach, is that we have universal goals. We have a completion rate goal, let's say in our state of, I believe it's 70%, but I'm going to go ahead and say 80%. If we have a universal goal, and we disaggregate data and we see that different groups are reaching that goal in different way, or excuse me, have different completion rates, right? We then have the opportunity to take targeted approaches to help those groups meet that goal, that universal goal. What we want to do less of, and what we need to do less of, is comparing student groups to each other. That's where we start to sort of get into some sticky places. We need to make sure that we are providing culturally responsive, targeted approaches to various groups, to all groups, to make sure that they are reaching those goals. And when it comes to race, that we have to make sure that there are not programs or practices that are exclusionary. So where we have opportunities to think about targeted approaches, culturally responsive approaches, that typically when that's the case, that we're using culturally responsive approaches, that doesn't mean that we say we are only using these approaches with African American students, right? But that everyone can benefit from new ways of doing things or different ways of doing things, even if they may show more promise and more impact within certain groups as they are reaching that universal goal. So these are some of the things that we're learning more about from the Office of Equity, in consultation, of course, with our Attorney General, our Assistant Attorney General's offices. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, are our practices excluding people or are they including people? And I believe that there is guidance that it was coming out from our state board's equity office as well around this, in terms of what it means for the equity legislation. Because there's even tension within that legislation in our own state laws around anti-discrimination. So it's a tricky time, and yet if we are really committed to making sure that all students are reaching high standards, that we're holding out high standards for all students, that we are thinking about different ways of supporting students, all students, to get to those standards, we're typically on the right track. And that was a really long-winded answer. I hope it got to your question. Thank you, Wendy. Other questions? I'll also say about that, if you have a question, like, as you're doing your self-assessment and you're thinking about your college's equity work, but you're thinking about how it all fits in, are you on the right track? Reach out. Reach out. There's never, at least in our office, there's never like a hand slapping moment. Don't do this. You shouldn't be doing this. You're gonna get your Guided Pathways money taken away for this. Just let us know, because if we can be a partner in helping you do your best work, that's where we are, and that's where we want to be. And I think that also feeling alone and feeling afraid around equity work right now doesn't serve students well, right? It doesn't get us to reach those goals. And so the more we can be open and bring our questions and our concerns to light, I think the better we are in really serving all students well and transparently, and making sure that the gaps that have existed in our service to students, particularly historically underserved students, that we continue to be on our way of eliminating those gaps in service. Any other questions? Just gonna check to see if there's anything in chat. Doesn't look like it. Okay, I'll stop sharing. So we will be again getting this recording online, but I will also be updating the slides and sending out more information about the 26-28 plan, as well as the 24-26 reports, because I know that there are remaining questions, and so I want to make sure that there's clarity. And then as that gets sent out, we'll make sure that the website is updated as well, so that there's one clear source of information. Thank you for being here. Also, thank you for your flexibility in the sort of last minute cancellation and rescheduling. I know that this is a tricky week with the schedule. So being here on a Wednesday after having a Tuesday off, and many folks took a Monday off as well. I apologize, dogs are going to start barking. But but appreciate your time, appreciate your energy, and please know that anything that I can do or my team can do to support you, happy to do it. And that includes, invite us to your campus. We're happy to come work with you and your team and wherever you're at, and move things forward. Oh my gosh, this dog is really losing it. I hope you can't hear it. So with that, I will just a final thank you. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you might have. And a special thank you to Holly, who's been such an amazing partner in this work, who was primarily responsible for authoring the entire documents, and who has been a wonderful support in getting the word out and sharing all the information. So thanks, everyone. Take care, and please don't hesitate to reach out.